Right now, this month, South Africa celebrates women doing amazing things in the country and abroad. But just how much progress has been made in appointing more women to leadership roles? We examine the steps taken by businesses, political parties and society at large to increase the number of women appointed to key positions. This morning, we will look at the importance of having more female political leaders. And on that note, Nompendulo Mkhatshwa joins us for this chat. Nompendulo, very good morning. Thank you very much for joining us. Of course, Nompendulo is a member of parliament, is known as the WITS SRC president, who was involved in the Fees Must Fall movement. And again, she's going to be highlighting her thoughts during the month of Women's Month. Nompendulo, good morning. Again, thanks for joining us. I just want to look at the gender strategies in place and even some of the pervasive gender norms and attitudes that persist in society to date. What does the month of August, deemed Women's Month, with, of course, Women's Day on the 9th of August 2020, signify for you?
Good morning, Lisa, and good morning to everybody watching at home. Women's Month is, we all are aware that the reason why in which we commemorate Women's Month is because of the 1956 Women's March against the apartheid pass laws. And, someone may say to us, but, it's years later, and why are we still commemorating this day? And essentially what we need to remind ourselves is that on days like this, we need to, one, give thanks to our foremothers and those that have come before us to ensure that we can enjoy the rights that we enjoy at the moment, but also so that we can track ourselves on how far we've come on matters relating to, issues related to that particular commemoration. So in this sense, we'll be looking at Women's Month, right? So in terms of issues relating to gender equality, gender equity, gender parity, how far have we come as a country in this democratic era since 1994? Where are we currently and where do we want to be? So it's a very important moment for us to introspect and also plan our way forward, building from, essentially the legacies and the aims and objectives that the woman of 1956 would have had in terms of, the realities of women in South Africa.
So Nompendulo, on that note, looking at the progress that has been made, the strides taken, I mean, as you said, representation matters. Do you think that there are enough women and young women in leadership positions?
Well, I mean, okay, first of all, Lisa, let's acknowledge the fact that the idea of leadership is a very broad one, right? So often when people think of leadership, they think of leadership in relation to politics. So if you speak about leadership, they'll think governance, they'll think the country. But we need to appreciate the idea of leadership beyond politics. We need to appreciate that there's leaders in science, there are leaders in the art space, the space that you find yourself in terms of, who's at the forefront of the productions of news, broadcasting, and so on and so forth. We need to look at leadership or women in leadership in sciences and engineering and sports, in various spheres. So let's first acknowledge that. And then let's go to the question that you're asking, on whether or not there is enough representation of women in leadership roles in various sectors and at various spheres, right? And we have not reached a moment where the representation of women in roles of leadership equates to the demographic representation of women in society. So that's basically speaking to proportional representation. Yeah. So no, we've not reached that point, but we have made great strides when it comes to that. And we must acknowledge that, that we do find ourselves in a place that we didn't find ourselves a couple of years ago. I mean, let's look at South Africa pertaining to the space that I find myself in, which is women in political leadership, right? So the stats have it that with the first democratic parliament of the Republic of South Africa in 1994, we had 27.4% representation of women in parliament. Through the 2019 elections, with the 6th parliament, of which I have the honor of sitting in, we are now sitting as South Africa with a representation of 45.25% women in parliament. And, when I speak about proportional representation and whether or not we've reached where we should be in terms of quota, right? Yeah. We haven't, because the 2019 mid-year population estimates by Stats SA give it that the amount of women in the country are sitting at 51.2% of the South African population. So in terms of proportional representation, we're not sitting where we should be. But I must again perhaps highlight as a matter of interest that you know, when in 2018 the World Economic Forum did research on the representation of women in various parliaments in the world, Rwanda was sitting with 61.3% representation of women in their parliament. Cuba coming in second, Bolivia third with 53.1%, and South Africa sitting 10th, which is quite interesting. But just because we're 10th as South Africa in the world in 2018, as recorded by the World Economic Forum, it doesn't mean, you know, we've reached where we should be.
Yes.
So we're not where we should be. And you know, sexism, and as a young black woman, you can imagine ageism as well is a great setback when it comes to the representation of young women as well in roles of leadership.
Nompendulo, I actually want to look at some of the challenges, you know, that seem to permeate and work against women in 2020 and beyond. I mean, we're looking at the institutional and societal challenges and constructs. We're looking at some of the gender norms and attitudes at large. What would you say are some of the challenges that you'd attribute to women not being prioritized to their, as to their male counterparts?
So we live in an intrinsically patriarchal society, right? Ageist society as well, where people are being used to led by men, and people are used to being led by older, you know, beings. And I guess we also need to acknowledge the fact that we move, we exist within a society that moves from a point where women at some point were not supposed to work. And when they did start working, they were meant to work certain jobs, and they were meant to fit at certain levels of the companies or institutions organogram. And when they started working, they earned less than their male counterparts for the same job that they did. So, you know, when we take that sort of history into consideration, we exist in a society that has always, we come far in terms of the role of women in occupying various spaces in society, right? And as it remains, even when we speak, Liesl, you and I, about the role of the presence of women in roles of leadership, that in itself is a conversation of privilege, because there are sectors. So we're speaking about the leadership, women leadership of various sectors, but there are sectors where we are still talking about women being in the actual sector, let alone them being in the leadership of that. So firstly, the intrinsic nature, or the intrinsic patriarchal nature of our society is a hindrance, and so those are the things we need to overcome. And you know, besides talking about the challenge, it's like how. So how do we overcome this intrinsically patriarchal society, right?
Yes.
So what we must always accept is that those who have privilege will never want to give up their privilege, and even when they're aware of the privilege that they have, they won't want to give up their privilege, because privilege, you know, at the top. So why would I want to? So we have. I'm trying to close up this response. We need to be very deliberate and intentional about our goal to have women included in various spaces. So when we speak about gender inclusivity, you know, we need to ensure that the enlightenment becomes a formal strategic priority of an organization, where it's a strategic goal, a dated target that is planned for, that is monitored, and that is evaluated. Otherwise, you know, we can't just hope that people will realize that, you know, women must be included. Privileges. People don't want to give up their privilege, so we need to be very intentional about ensuring the inclusivity of women in those spaces.
So you've spoken about some of the institutional and societal constructs that seem to form a barrier, you know, to some of these successes that women could experience. But unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave the conversation there. I mean, there's so much more to unpack. But as the month of August ensues, of course, we'll continue to take a look at some of the leadership that are representing appointing women on that front. Again, thank you very much to former student activists and also former Wits SRC President and Member of Parliament, Nompendulo Mkhatshwa, who was chatting to us about women in politics and leadership roles at large.